The goal in your life is not to figure out how to be comfortable in your mental prisons, but to realize that you have the keys to set yourself free. Hey you, welcome to the program. This is How to Be Mesmerizing, and I have a fantastic mesmerizing guest today. We are super excited to have anthonygalie with us today. Yay, Anthony! Now, Anthony is a superstar and a legend in the business of corporate speaking, and he also is an amazing hypnotist. And so he has, over the last couple of decades, combined the two arts and become one of the world's top corporate hypnosis trainers and also entertainers. And he's been all over the world, and he's just an amazing guy. And I brought him on the show, not just because of all his amazing accomplishments. I mean, you name a big corporation, a big company, and he's presented for him. So he's at the top of his game, the best of the best. And he's also one of the most giving, caring people you could ever meet. I mean, he just launches in. Before we started recording the podcast, he was just sharing one golden nugget after another, after another, after another. I have like writer's cramp from trying to take all these notes. So Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so happy that you were able to carve some time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And it's his birthday today. So everybody send happy birthday wishes to Anthony. And hey, we're going to celebrate you all week long. So
my birthday. Another one.
Everybody, yeah, when we're young, we're like, yay, birthday. And when we get a little bit older, we're like, boo. Yeah. So Anthony, tell me a little bit about how you ended up wanting to travel around teaching people what you know, because it's not just the entertainment of getting people to go beyond their fears. What you're really doing is showing people how powerful they really are. So how'd you get into that?
Actually, serendipitously, I mean, it was pretty much by accident. I had always been interested in hypnosis. Actually started doing stage hypnosis in college, fraternities and groups. When I was in graduate school, gentlemen, there were only 7 of us, I think, in the program. But one of the guys had a hypnotherapy practice. He was about 10, 12 years older than I was. And when the program ended, he offered to sell me his hypnotherapy practice and train me to do and run the practice. I did that for 3 or 4 years. In 1980, I sold the practice and ended up moving to a very remote corner of the Hawaiian Islands. I lived in the Puna district of the Big Island, for those who are familiar. And I was in an area that had no electricity and no public water, no anything. I was living very interesting, but 3 or 4 miles away from the nearest telephone, and needed to make a living. I thought I would be a hypnotherapist in Hilo, which was the nearest town, about 20 some miles away, but they only had 39,000 people at the time, and 60% were Japanese, and they just don't do that. So it was financially, it just wasn't working out. And I have to credit my ex-wife saying one day, you should be giving seminars to salespeople. You should go out there and do public speaking. I had done public speaking as a hypnotherapist to generate business for the hypnotherapy, and I had worked closely with the American Cancer Society. They had made me state facilitator. I was actually going around teaching people how to teach stop smoking courses, and had some experience getting in front of groups and speaking. And I just drove down to the nearest telephone, started making phone calls. And that's what started it, basically financial necessity. But I clued in very quickly to what I knew, which was hypnosis and learning theory and how it could be applied to the business world. And I was at that time teaching all-day programs, did that for a number of years, but then started getting invited to speak at conferences and conventions. And those were 60 or 90-minute presentations. And they were much more lucrative, and they were easier. And I kind of condensed the material that I had and put it together into a 60 or 90-minute presentation, did a number of them, and at some point you hit a critical mass. You do so many of them that you start getting invited to the larger events. You might do it for a region, and then another region. Well, can you do this for corporate? And then can you do this for national? Can you do this for the international? It ended up it was just kind of like working your way up a pyramid. And at some point, I guess the year was 1995, where all the doors swung open. I had had all this practice by that time in public speaking and had the information down pat, and was invited to speak to a number of prestigious conferences. And from that point forward, I was a corporate speaker, a platform speaker, and did that until I guess I did total 39 years, started in 1980, so we're 2019.
Wow.
Coming into 40 years, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
39 years of doing that is really, yeah. So
seems like yesterday, like 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, you must have started, when you were like 7.
I started hypnotizing people when I was 9, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I've been hypnotizing for well over half a century.
So how did you get into hypnosis, at that age?
Saw a TV program. I remember the minute it happened. I was watching a television program. It was called The Life of Riley. And the plot involved him getting hypnotized. And I just knew that was interesting, and literally rode my bicycle the next day to the library. Only reference I could find was in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And I was determined to learn what it was. And then I found on the back of comic books they would sell. And believe it or not, the book that I bought was actually informative. It was from a guy named Melvin Powers. It was actually a good book, but it was whatever it was, $1.25, and I actually put change in the envelope. So I started buying these. Yeah, it was crazy. And so I ran around and started hypnotizing the kids until they stopped me. It was like, my parents were like, "What are you doing?" It's just really cool. So just kept with it. As soon as I was old enough to get a driver's license, I took my first course. I lived in an area in New Jersey, and I guess about 10 miles away, there was a town called Pennsauken, where a guy actually taught a real course. And as soon as I was 15, whatever it is, you get your driver's license, I'd saved up enough money. I took that course and another one. I just took courses when I was in college, studied it, found who at Rutgers was studying and became their research assistant, and basically just took it from there. I just have been in it since I was a kid. So
that's an amazing story. Yeah, anybody that actually takes a course on hypnotism gets hooked, because most people that hear hypnosis, they think of just swinging watches and hocus pocus, and they don't trust it or they don't believe it because they think it's just smoke and mirrors, and or they're afraid that it's dangerous and they're going to get sucked in like some crazy movie, like the movie Get Out, where you just tap on a teacup and somebody falls into a trance and they're trapped there, which I wish it was that easy. But
sometimes it actually is.
Yeah, well, I haven't learned the teacup method, but yeah, but that's not the hypnotist. In that situation, it's the person doing it, as you know, right? Absolutely. So they are just very suggestible. And I always say that when you have someone that's that suggestible, they don't need the hypnosis there. You just tell them what to do and they do it. And
exactly.
Yeah, and so but whenever you take this class, you start to realize that it's the study of how to train your brain for success, right? And how to use the power of suggestion. And if you have a powerful computer and you want to learn the shortcuts, then you can get the most out of that computer, and you can realize how powerful it can be, and it improves your quality of life. And your mind in many ways is like that. Hypnosis teaches you the shortcuts. Now, before we were started the program, you were about to tell me your new theory of hypnosis, since you've been at it for almost 40 years. So I would love to hear that.
I just kind of publicly announced it a few weeks ago. I was at the Heartland Convention in Missouri, and had an opportunity to get it on video. I have been thinking about this for a long, long time, and had put what I felt were some of the final pieces together. My brothers are both very accomplished and very smart, and I spoke to my younger brother and laid it out for him and asked him what he thought. And he said, "I think it's a really viable theory." And he said, "Have you told anybody?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, you should probably tell somebody before you die." Because, And so I had this opportunity at Heartland Convention, so I laid it out. And it's a theory that actually had a germination back in 1976 when I was in graduate school. I had a professor who had studied, he had done postdoctoral work with a very famous psychologist known as Philip Teitelbaum. And Teitelbaum was in the middle of studying a phenomenon known as the lateral hypothalamic syndrome. Basically, they were taking animals, lab rats and cats, and they would go to the lateral hypothalamus and take a electrode and just burn a couple of neurons at a time. They would lesion, let the animal recover, take another animal, move it a little bit, and they were doing animals and see what happened when they recovered. And they stumbled on an area that every rat that had the lesion in that area, when they recovered, they all became what's called polydipsic. They would start drinking and not stop. They would drink pretty much until their stomachs exploded. And they realized that somehow they had stumbled onto an area in the brain that was telling the animal to stop drinking. And when they destroyed that, the animal had no capacity to stop. It just kept drinking. So they went to the other side. The left lateral hypothalamus performed the same exact procedure, ended up finding a corresponding spot. These animals, when they recovered, wouldn't drink at all. They became what's called adipsic. And some until they would die from lack of water. And they recognized that within the structure, there are essentially competing systems. Drink continuously, don't drink at all. And the lateral hypothalamic theory was these two systems fire in tandem, and that's what gives you normal drinking behavior. If you're thirsty, you drink until you're done. If you're full, you say back and forth. If you destroy one of those two, it's uncontrolled. And what's happening is these two systems are firing, and they are mutually inhibiting each other from going crazy. That's what the theory of mutual inhibition is. They went to other areas of the brain. They eventually found an area that would control eating. They found an area on the amygdala that would control rage. Lesion one area, and the animal would become completely passive, wouldn't attack anything, put your finger in their mouth. Another lesion, the other area, they'd attack anything, put a pencil in and they go after it, And they found these systems, these higher cortical systems. Most of them were complicated behaviors, eating, drinking. And they developed the lateral hypothalamic syndrome. And one of the systems they found was sleep. And my professor at the time, Dr. Wogan, who had studied directly with Teitelbaum just the year before, one day told us about sleep. He said, it's a good example of a mutually inhibiting system. It looks like when you fall asleep, it looks like you're turning something off, when in fact, you're turning something on. You have a mutually inhibiting system. You have a system that says, go to sleep. You have another system that says, wake up. And in normal area, they're balanced. And when a person is falling asleep, the sleep system inhibits the wake system. And when a person wakes up, the wake system inhibits the sleep system. And then you have normal cognition. And I recall, as he was describing it, I had a thought, that sounds to me just like what I see when I hypnotize people. That I had from a very early point said to myself that people are in hypnosis a lot. That if you ask them to spell a word, they'll look up to the sky. If they're daydreaming, if they drive past their exit, if you're talking, they drift for a few moments. I never looked at hypnosis as this isolated, go through a hypnotic induction, only time you see it. I always thought of hypnosis as something that was there all along, popping in, popping out, popping in. And it was very similar to what they were describing in this mutual inhibition system. I had the idea back in 1976 and basically approached hypnosis that way. When I went forward in my business, I always thought of it as always being there. So I was always watching the client and see what happened when you would talk to them. Did they lean forward? Did the eyes widen? Did they become cataleptic? Did their breathing change? Because I never looked at this hypnosis as this isolated island. I looked at it as the mutually inhibiting system. And, when a person's really alert and conscious, they're kind of inhibiting the trance. And when they go into the trance, they're inhibiting consciousness. They go into highway hypnosis or whatever, but most of the time it's like this. Mm-hmm. And I tried a variety of theories that didn't work and ultimately came back to that. I, a few years ago, started researching. And I started Googling hypnosis and mutual inhibition, hypnosis, mutually inhibiting systems. Couldn't find a thing, nothing, zero, nothing came up. They're still studying the lateral hypothalamic syndrome and mutual inhibition in animal studies in droves, but I couldn't find anything that applied to humans until I stumbled on a study that was done in 2010 by Harvard. and they called it the flip-flop model of sleep. As I was reading it, I recognized they were saying exactly what Wogan, they start out by saying, going to sleep is not turning something off, very much turning something on. You have these two mutually inhibiting systems, and they were basically saying what Wogan had said back in 1976. They didn't credit Teitelbaum. They didn't, I guess third or fourth paragraph, you have mutually inhibiting systems. First time I'd seen mutual inhibition in a sentence, and I read more and more, and I realized, wow, these guys have done it. This is the human model. Just like Wogan said the animals were doing, this is what humans do. They had mapped out the brain, and they had located it, what a surprise, in the hypothalamus, in the lateral hypothalamus. Mm-hmm. And the science has clearly advanced since 1976. When I was being educated in 76, we were taught there were 4 neurotransmitters, and now there are quite a few dozen. But it turns out that norexin is a neurotransmitter, and it is the reason for narcolepsy. And they pointed out in this article that an absence, low levels of norexin, of orexin, and the person can no longer control the switch going to sleep. They fall asleep uncontrollably. And when they add the orexin, the narcolepsy can be controlled. And they call it the flip-flop model of sleep. And that confused me. But then I realized they were modeling it after an electronic switch in computers. One of the fundamental electronic switches on a computer, and you'll see them on most circuit boards, is called a flip-flop switch. It is able to maintain 2 different states. And in other words, one state of processing information one way and processing information the second way. And if you put a task into a computer and it needs to do it one way, it sends information into the flip-flop switch, and it'll flip over to what it needs. And then it flips back when it doesn't need it. It's called the flip-flop switch, and there's an internal signal being sent. And that's the model they used for sleep, where you maintain this stasis, these 2 mutually inhibiting systems. But if you want to go to sleep or whatever, when you fall asleep, you throw, the chemical is thrown, signal is sent, flip, it goes this way. And then to wake up, another signal is sent, and it's all happening at the hypothalamus. And I recognize that in my mind as being pretty much what I was seeing with people in hypnosis. They also mentioned in the article, and it fit beautifully, that the act of falling asleep is very fast. It might take you 20 minutes to get to sleep. You lie in bed, you get in a certain position, pillow's got to be right, whatever it is you do, count sheep. But the falling asleep is very fast. When the signal's sent, it usually is just a second or 2, sometimes milliseconds, so fast you can't be conscious of it. You ever been conscious of falling asleep? I mean, it's just boom. It might take you 20 minutes to get to that moment, but when you fall asleep, it's in just an instant. That's the signal that's being sent, probably from the hypothalamus and probably a neurochemical. And it occurred to me that if that's what hypnosis is, it looks like a mutually inhibiting system. We should be looking for the switch in the hypothalamus, and no one is. If they're doing all kinds of PET scans and MRIs, looking at which areas of the brain are affected by different cognitive tasks, no one has zoned in on the hypothalamus and asked, when a person goes into a trance, because you can put people in trances very easily, put a person in an MRI and start asking them questions, how to spell the word psychoanalysis. Remember 8th grade teacher, you can flip-flop them very quickly. And just chart and look at the hypothalamus, what happens at the hypothalamus when you do that, or get a group of very hypnotizable subjects and give them a post-hypnotic suggestion. When I say the word, you go back into trance or whatever, very easy to do. They roll their eyes back in their head and they go, get some good subjects, put them in and out and look at the hypothalamus. And if you see changes taking place right there, if that portion lights up or if the chemical change takes place, then it is a mutually inhibiting system. And that's what we should be looking for. That's the theory. And if it's correct, it has a lot of implications. The implications are that if you know what's controlling, if it really is a flip-flop switch, and if it really is happening in that area, it might be a different area of the brain, but it seems to be happening at the hypothalamus. And if you can identify the chemical or the switch, you could control it.
How would you control it?
Just like they're controlling narcolepsy. In other words, theoretically, if you knew what the chemical was and where the switch was taking place, add more of it. You can either flip it so they stay in trance, stay conscious, or stop being too, you can control it.
So aren't we doing that naturally by using the hypnotic techniques?
Precisely, but you get a bell curve. They're studying, when they do this study, the top 5%, that tail end of the continuum. We alluded to this, the really good subjects.
Mm-hmm.
There are advantages to being a really good subject.
Mm-hmm.
As a hypnotherapist, every once in a while, that would be the person that would stop smoking in a single session.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke 20 years, one session. They were pain in the neck because they'd run around and tell all their friends. It only takes one session. Yeah. But, right? There are giant.
I get those testimonials. I quit smoking in 10 minutes. It's unbelievable. And then everybody has that expectation. I'm like, well,
yeah.
Might take a little longer than that for you.
Hypnotic suggestibility follows the bell curve. And most of us, by definition, have this normal flip-flop. You can learn hypnosis over a reasonable period of time. It's a learn, et cetera, et cetera. But you do have some that are great subjects. And you also have some that are extremely difficult to the point where, theoretically, they could probably never be hypnotized. Mm-hmm. If you control the switch, if it is a neural switch, you could affect any of those areas. You could get a person maybe that is an average subject and facilitate them becoming a great subject therapeutically, so that they have dramatic results, or you can take a person that can't be theoretically a terrible subject and make them better subjects by adding the chemical. You can manipulate it in a variety of ways. And theoretically, you could throw the switch so that a person stays conscious and doesn't go drifting in and out, because drifting in and out can have disadvantages. Mm-hmm. It's one of the leading causes of industrial accidents. People are doing a rote task with a very dangerous tool. They're sawing boards continuously, and they go into a trance, and that's how they have the accident, So perhaps by taking a pill, they could remain more alert on the job, theoretically. This is all theoretical stuff. But knowing what controls that state switch theoretically gives you control over it.
So this is exactly what I've been talking about, to the general public when I talk about hypnosis. Because I'm here talking to a premier hypnotist who's been doing it, for 40 years and sharing what he's learned around the world with some of the biggest companies that exist. And the whole time we talk about hypnosis, it sounds like I'm talking to a neuroscientist, right? When we're talking to a hypnotist, you're talking to someone who is passionate about what happens in the brain, what happens in your mind, what happens emotionally. And, we're talking about neurochemicals and all these different processes that happen unconsciously in the brain. And that is not what most people expect. They think of hypnosis and they think of, carnival tricks. And here we're talking about hardcore neuroscience and what's going on in the brain. And I love it, right? So now some of you listening might have gone, okay, that's amazing, but I don't know what to do with it. And we'll talk about what you can do with it next, right? But I just think this is fascinating. How you're taking a deep dive into what's going on and how you're applying it and how you're thinking about ways that people go in and out of trances that someone might not have ever thought about. Like when you're talking about workplace safety, right? For example, a lot of people might not ever have thought that, put those two things together, that people will go into a trance and mistakes happen and they don't think of it as a hypnotic trance. And so when you start to realize that hypnosis is something that we do all the time, some of my clients will come in and say, I've never been hypnotized before. And I say, maybe not normally, but you've been going in and out of hypnotic trances your whole life. I mean, if you come in here to stop smoking or because you're totally stressed out, you're going into smoking trances every day. You're overriding any kind of logic, to smoke a cigarette knowing that it's going to hurt your health, but you do it anyway because you've hypnotically been convinced that it's going to make you feel better, right? Even though it does the opposite. So I just love that you're sharing this. Now, of course, you also know that to get people to be open to even hearing about this, you have to entertain them. So how'd you become so darn entertaining?
I'm not sure that I am so darn entertaining.
Oh, that's not the case, because if you see his videos, that this guy knows how to entertain a crowd, like big crowds. So he's just so humble. I'm going to toot your horn for you.
I just do what I do, and I have more fun. We mentioned this. I'm having more fun than they are. That's all. I just am so fascinated by it and so passionate about it. I don't have to think about entertaining people. I just think it is fascinating, and hopefully I transfer some of the fascination to the group. I think that it amazes people when they see it, and I believe that most people enjoy that I try to tell them the truth about it. Basically, do my best to explain, this is what I think is going on. And whereas many times if they see a hypnotic demonstration, it is put forward that the hypnotist is the all great and powerful. One thing that is my pet peeve, and it drives me to distraction, is when you see a very good professional hypnotist do a demonstration, the subject does something amazing, and the hypnotist stands forward and takes a bow. And it's like, you didn't do anything.
Right.
Did you see what they did?
Yes.
And I mean, that was just the attitude I had about it. And it's the truth. It's, I want to make a comment about that we're talking about neuroscience, that you realize that is probably a side effect of the time that we live in. Think about it. The first time hypnosis comes to prominence in terms of attention, people start actually paying attention to it in the modern era, was in 1776 with Mesmer, and he called it animal magnetism. The reason he called it animal magnetism is that the prevailing medical theory in those days was the humors, that you had these humors going through your body, these fluids. So animal magnetism was a fluid that was supposedly in your body. It fit in with the language, the mindset of the time. And then in the 1840s, Braid comes up and recognizes hypnotic states and calls it hypnotism, from the Greek word sleep. He thinks when these people close their eyes and he asks them, are you asleep? And they say yes, he thinks he's dealing with a form of sleep. So it's called hypnotism, somnambulism, sleepwalkers, all that terminology is all holdover from Braid. And then a few years later, 30 or 40 years later, Sigmund Freud comes along, talks about the conscious and the unconscious. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about hypnotic, which is a sleep state, dealing with the unconscious mind. Today's day, we're using MRIs and PET scans and neurosurgery. So our terminologies are morphing into neurosurgery. And if you recall, the flip-flop switch is a computer thing. And what are we all dominated now in our mentality? 50 years from now, they'll be talking about something else.
Yeah.
Years from now, it might be genes, or I have no idea, but the terminologies morph with the times.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a brilliant point. I mean, that's really, those are key, crucial figures in hypnosis that you're talking about. And so if somebody would talk about humors, and this energy running through the body, and you hear that and you're like, oh my gosh, they didn't know what they were talking about. But if you change the language and talk about neurotransmitters flowing through the body, or you talk about having chakras like Eastern medicine, then you're like, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. No, wait a second, it's the same stuff. People are just calling it different things. Right. And so no matter what age we're in, we always think that we're the enlightened ones. And we're also the ones that, oh my gosh, you've never had it this bad. It's so stressful. We're so egocentric. The world revolves around where we're at right now. And, but you make really good points that the goal is the more you understand what's going on, the more you have influence and control. I remember I was we were having a luncheon in a church basement, right, of this church that I went to. And I remember talking to one of the guys, and I was probably in my, late 20s. And I was sitting down with a gentleman that I knew my whole life that was in the church. And he was probably like 55 years old, successful guy. And we started talking about hypnosis. And I remember him trusting or saying, I just don't trust that. I don't think that we should do things where you don't really understand how it works. And I was trying to explain to him how it works. And I knew he wasn't getting it. And finally I said, do you take an aspirin? And he says, yeah. I said, do you know how it works? And he says, well, no. I said, when you flip on a switch, do you know how electricity really works? And he says, well, no, I guess not. I said, well, you don't have any problem swallowing that pill or flipping that switch, do you? And he came back, the next Sunday, and he says, I thought a lot about that, and it really changed my perspective. We make these assumptions and we have these judgments about things, and we really close ourselves off to opportunities without even realizing that we're doing it. And eventually, as we move forward, a lot of hypnotists over the years, would ask me if I was keynoting or being interviewed. They would say, do you think hypnosis is mainstream? And I always say yes. And they always surprise me, and or be surprised by that. And they would say, well, how can you say that? Because, people aren't still embracing it. And I said, if you don't talk about it as though it's already mainstream, it never will be. And people are using it all the time. They just don't have they're not using the same language. So they might not be calling it hypnosis.
Right.
We've got to keep educating people on this. So you've hypnotized, I mean, I don't even know, thousands and tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people in your career, traveling around, working with big groups. I'm sure,
Lots
you know, yeah, lots and lots and lots. So, so what are maybe some cool things or some pretty like mind-blowing experiences that you've had on stage or just in working with people in general? Anything come to mind?
Well, yeah, when you were just describing that it is mainstream, and I've maintained and say in many of my presentations, when I start talking about hypnosis, I'll say, don't let the word scare you. I happen to believe the average person in this audience is already spending about 60% of their day in a trance anyhow. I'm just going to show you how to put it to some good use. And I do that to break the ice, and then I give some of the common examples. If you don't think you've ever been in a trance, have you ever driven past your exit on a freeway? You ever pull in a driveway at the end of the day, you can't remember which road you took? You ever walk into home when your members of your family is so tranced out they don't hear you calling their name? So I give examples of everyday trances, pointing out that it's happening all the time. But then I will often build on that idea, and I will say, the next time you see a person daydreaming, what most people do, if you were to walk in the room and see them staring out into space, a million miles away, as you make a noise, just call their name. Don't do that. For the next couple of weeks, if you see a person in a trance, just sit there and look and ask yourself, what am I seeing? I mean, what does a person in a trance look like? Learn to recognize it. And if you look, this is what you're going to see. You'll see catalepsy, all the cluster, the ironed out facial expression, the eye blink will either be cataleptic or will be slow. The breathing will be very slow and regular. I said, you'll recognize it. Now, when they come out of the trance, when they snap out of that daydream, ask that person, what were you just thinking about? And 9 out of 10 will say nothing. And they're telling you the truth. They have forgotten what they were daydreaming about. Top achievers don't do that. I think one of the characteristics of top achievers is that they have, somewhere along the line, learned how to hypnotize themselves. They don't call it that, but if you listen to them, they'll say, I had a dream, I had a vision, I could see myself, I'd go to bed every night picturing it. They were hypnotizing themselves. If you walk into a heavy hitter's office, and I'll say to them, I don't know who the top producers are in this group, but you do. And if you go into that top producer's office and you see that person in a trance, staring out into space, locked in thought, when they come out, ask them, what were they just thinking about? Most of them will answer the question. I was just trying to put this deal together, just trying to figure out how to make the financing work, just try to figure out how they have learned how to use it. We all spend a lot of time in the trance. One of the characteristics of the heavy hitters, they figured out how to use it. They're programming themselves, they're hypnotizing themselves. And you say, what's one of the oddest things that have happened? There's a million of them. Every hypnosis demonstration is odd. But years ago, I guess year 2000 or whatever, Prudential invited me for their ultra high producers dinner, which out of a sales force, I believe they had 30,000 reps total. These were the top 100 or whatever. These were the top dogs. And the president of the company at the time was named Richard Painter. And we're having dinner. Stage is set up. I'm supposed to be the after dinner speaker. And he comes up to me about 20 minutes before I'm due to give my speech. He goes, Anthony, I'm looking around this room. He said, I'm worried. What are you talking about? I know these guys. These guys are used to taking orders, giving orders, not taking orders. I can't picture them being hypnotic subjects. And the first thing was, well, thanks for that thought 10 minutes before I'm due to go on stage, Rich. I appreciate that. I said, Rich, I've always believed that one of the characteristics of high achievers is that they are good subjects. They're likely to be good subjects because they have been hypnotizing themselves for a long time. I said, I'm really not worried. The way I look at it, I would expect better subjects. He said, good luck. He goes, I know these good luck. And I could have brought half of the group up. I remember that night. I usually limit to 8 or 9 to manage the time, but I had some of the deepest subjects I had seen in a long time. They were just out of it. And I recall he wrote it in his letter. He was simply dumbfounded. He was like, I would never have guessed that. And I'm looking at it now in a totally different way. I mean, I knew how driven, how focused, how hardworking, how goal-oriented that particular group was. And I was looking at that as an anti-characteristic of hypnosis. And you taught me that that's the characteristic. And I mean, I've always believed that. I always believe that heavy hitters at some level are tapping into it. You know, very good athletes talk about getting in the zone where they were, if they're wrestlers, I could get so focused. Sometimes I have a great subject, you know, and I would always ask them afterwards, had you ever been hypnotized? And many of them would say, I would have bet the farm that I couldn't be hypnotized. No, I have never been hypnotized before. You've astounded me. But I was an athlete in school and I was a wrestler. And I remember I could get in this mind state before a match. I called it getting in the zone. I would feel no pain afterwards when I was clean. There were bruises, scratches. I have no idea where they came from. I was just focused on pinning the opponent. A woman came up one night and said, I was a long distance runner. And I learned to stay focused on the goal line. If I thought about how many steps I was taking or how far along I was, I'd be exhausted in an hour. So I just would get into my mind. I'd visualize myself crossing the finish line. I mean, all of them had at some level stumbled into hypnotizing themselves. They just weren't calling it that. They all had their private names for it. So I very much agree with what you're saying. It's already mainstream. It's what I was able to do was just take what most of them were already doing and basically categorize it, show them this is actually self-hypnosis. This is a duplicatable thing. Here's a structure that you can follow, a procedure. I basically just formatted it for them. But I've always maintained top achievers are hypnotizing themselves.
That's outstanding, Anthony. I love it. I love it. I had an NFL player in my office last week, and I asked him before we got into the hypnosis, I said, is there anything that you want me to say or focus on? And I got out my pen and paper, and I was ready to write, because the best athletes in the world, they know exactly what to say. And he literally gave me a hypnotic script. I mean, I just wrote down every single word that came out of his mouth, and he was just flying through it. He says, I want to know where my hands and my feet are. I want to be quick off the snap. I want to follow through on my blocks. I want to be physical and fierce. I want to get out there. And, and he was just like writing it all down. And then basically I got him relaxed and then just read it back to him. and then Absolutely. He left, and yeah, that's all I needed to do, because he was already putting himself in a trance. He just needed somebody to help, build that confidence. You just need one person to believe in you for you to believe in yourself. And so, feeding back what he already knew. But that's a prime example, of a top athlete, a top performer, knowing that they just don't realize that it's hypnotic, right? They don't realize that they're programming their hypothalamus to respond the way they want it to, when they want it to. Yeah.
Years ago, became friends with an athlete. I don't follow sports. I don't follow football at all, for whatever reason. And the biggest human being I ever saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're pretty big.
Brian Holloway was on the speaking circuit with me back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And we ended up being in the same conventions 2 or 3 or 4 times. We became friends.
Yeah.
And he explained to me, Brian Holloway was a Patriot linebacker. And he was a All-American at Stanford. And he was All-Pro with the Patriots, whatever it was, 5 or 6 years. I don't follow up, but those were his credentials. An enormous human being. And one evening we were having dinner talking, and he says, when I was at Stanford, let me tell you how I got so successful. We would get the playbooks. We would have our games on Saturday. On Sunday, they'd give us the playbook for the next week. So Monday, we'd start practicing, and we'd have to learn the moves or whatever. He'd bring us back to the gym every day, Monday through Friday. Before we could take our showers, he would lie us on these mats, and we had to run the play in our head 50 times before he'd let us take our shower. When Saturday came and we were playing the game, it was actually just the 51st time I had actually run, and they go out and practice and all, but in my mind, I had already done it. Whatever it was, 250 times, well, I guess that'd be 250 times. So by the time I did, it was the 251st time. And he goes, that was a technique this coach in Stanford taught me. And I did it with the Patriots. And I guess I must have been hypnotizing myself. And I believe he was. You would hear that over and over again. On the speaking circuit, you get to meet people that are quite accomplished. Some of them you sit next to the president of the company, or you're sitting there in the audience and you see who gets the awards and who the top dogs are. And I would hear it over and over again. You know what you say? I didn't realize it was hypnosis, but this is how I got to where I am. Very, very similar stories.
Yeah, if you say to somebody, you know, we're going to use relaxation and guided imagery, then they're like, oh, sure, yeah, I get that. I've used that before. But when you say hypnosis, then it's like a totally different thing. And then, of course, relaxation and guided imagery, when you use hypnosis, you're creating specific emotional states. So it's kind of like, I always tell people, hypnosis is like meditation on steroids. And so
directed meditation.
Yeah, yeah. And so I mean, this is just fascinating. So then so you've been hanging around these top achievers, and if you know, people that are listening to this podcast are mesmerizing in their own right, which is why they're attracted to listening to a podcast on how to be mesmerizing, right? And so we're just looking for ways to take our game to the next level. So, you know, through your career, do you have some tips or suggestions if people wanted to, you know, be a speaker or just be a top performer, some things that they can do, how they can use the power of their mind to stand out and make their goals a reality?
Sure. Goodness, that would go on forever. I'll tell you what I think would be one of the prime. I think there are two prime things that you ask a person, what are the characteristics of successful people? Most people know what they are. They work very hard. They set goals. They manage their time. They're very creative. They'll give you the characteristics of the heavy hitters. And there are some that I found that most miss. And one that is key. I believe you have to love what you're doing. I believe you have to love something about it. And if I work with a lot of salespeople. It's one of the big markets in public speaking. Some of them loved the thrill of the sale. They looked at it as a contest. Who won, who lose. Some loved that they were able to help other people. They really believed in their product or service, and they were genuinely helping people. Someone loved that it was a vehicle that they could use to get their family what they wanted to give them. They had different things that they loved, but if they didn't have passion, they didn't have a love for it, they weren't going to be able to handle the rejection, the grind, the ups and downs of sales, the inconsistency, the unpredictability part of it. You and I briefly talked before the camera started rolling about in public speaking, if I were to get into it, how did you stay in it for the first 3-4 years when you weren't making much money? Because I wasn't the first 3-4 years I was doing it. I was inventing it, and as I was going along, and it was just because I loved it. I would have done it for free. It didn't matter. The money never mattered. Money's nice, but that wasn't what I was doing it for. And that's a key characteristic. So if you are in hypnosis, if you decide to go into public speaking, if you're in hypnotherapy, if you're in stage hypnosis, if you're in comedy, if you don't love it, you're going to have a hard time handling the ups and downs or the drags. That's the first characteristic. Second characteristic is really what I based a big chunk of my presentations on, was that when I finally started interviewing heavy hitters, a year or two in the business, a light went off. I'm speaking to all these awards banquets. I'm getting sat next to all these people that have built businesses and all. I'm seeing a lot of what other people would consider successful people, a lot more than the average person will ever get to meet. So almost every meeting, someone's being identified for something. And if I was at the banquet and the person wins the agent or the producer of the year, and then I go on, and afterwards I would seek them out. I started tracking them down. Congratulations on your award. And I learned to ask them a question. I must have asked 10,000 people this question. Do you mind if I ask you a question? What do you do to stay motivated? What do you mean? Well, you won the award. I figured there's a reason. What do you do to stay motivated? And here's, right away I found it. The more successful they were, the higher up the chain, the longer they had been successful, faster the answer to the question came back. These people that are consistently high achievers are motivating themselves, most of them every single day. They would come right back and tell me. Most of them would say, that's a weird question. I gotta be honest, no one's ever asked me that before, but okay, since you asked me, this is what I do. They were all doing something. Most of them were doing it on a daily basis. And going back to my experimental psychology days, I rapidly realized what was happening. The average person can only stay motivated for about 48 hours. If you go to a convention or a conference and you're all thrilled and you're excited, you hear a speaker, oh, my person changed my life. You go back 3 or 4 days later, and most of that enthusiasm and motivation has dissipated. The average person can only stay fired up for about 48 hours before it dissipates. And the top achievers somewhere along the line figured that out. They recognized that they had to continually re-motivate themselves within that 48-hour window. And there were dozens, hundreds of examples, but by far the most common example I heard, I write my goals down every day. What do I do to stay motivated? It takes me 2 minutes. You know, when I get to the job or right before I leave, I got a yellow notepad on my desk. I rewrite my goals just to stay sharp, just to stay focused. I don't know what it's about, but when I stop doing that, I lose my edge. I lose my drive. That's the classic example of a motivational program. Within the 48-hour window, they are doing something that they can see, that their brain can focus on, and the most common is writing your goals down. So I'll say that to audiences, and I'll say, I cannot be the first person that has shared that secret of success. And how many of you in here, have never heard, you've all heard that, right? All right, so here's the operational question. You all know that, writing goals down. How many of you honestly are actually doing it? And it's like 2 out of 100 hands go up. 2 out of 100. And I'll say, all right, the other 98, why wouldn't you do this? It takes a couple minutes a day. It's free. It's easy. You don't have to go to a course to learn how to do this. No machinery is involved. Why in the world wouldn't you do it? Most common answer I get, I'm just too busy. Mm-hmm. So let me get this straight. Mm-hmm. You're too busy being a mediocre performer to do what the high achievers are doing. And I'll say, don't take my word for this. I do not know who the heavy hitters are in this group, but you do. Go interview them afterwards and ask them if what I'm saying is incorrect. Do not take my word for this, and they're all going to tell you, yeah, I do something every day. The most common is writing your goals down, but some of them will say things like I read affirmations, or I jump out of bed and do push-ups and say it's going to be a great day, or they all could clearly identify what they were doing. They were on what I called a motivational program. Yeah. And that became the basis of my entire platform presentation. I always would open up by saying, I'm going to make a bold statement. It's going to sound strange, but I believe it's true. It's easy to get motivated. Getting motivated is easy. Staying motivated is the challenge. New Year's resolutions, best example. Yeah. Just a few months ago, millions of people woke up. What's the most common New Year's resolution in America? 10 pounds. Weight. and they meant it. They were highly motivated. You ask them, why do you want to lose the weight? Without hesitation, they'll give you a long list of highly motivating reasons. I'll look better, feel better, wear clothes I haven't worn in years, be happy, be healthy, be proud of myself. That's a lot of motivation. They're fully, completely motivated. But then you go back a week later and they're sitting there, diving into a bag of chips or a cookie or whatever. And what about the diet? And they'll say, not today, man. See what's going on around here? But they can't stay motivated. Yeah. So I came up with the programs that everything I show them is within that 48-hour window. It's easy to do. It takes less than 5 minutes a day. But if you can get yourself on a motivational program, that's probably the most common element that people don't think about and is missing. They'll tell you, you have to work hard, set goals, manage your time, be creative, etc. Very few of them come back and say, you need to be doing something within that 48-hour window or you're not going to be able to stay motivated. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think is the answer. That's outstanding. I mean, it's really outstanding. And, if you're listening, like for me personally, right, I hang out with top achievers. I'm a top achiever. You're obviously a top achiever. That's why I have you on the program. And what am I doing while you're talking? I'm writing notes. I'm filling up my little Post-it note. If I run out of paper, I start writing on my arm. I'm taking these notes. Perfect. And everything you've said isn't anything I haven't heard before, but I'm still taking notes because in my mind, it's how you're saying it or a fresh point of view or the clever way in which you're putting the words together. And when I write it down, it becomes more real for me. And then I get excited. And so it's just another way of staying excited. And if you think that somehow, you're above that or beyond that, you're fooling yourself because you have identified, Anthony, how top achievers think. They're always obsessed with what they're doing next, with what they're focusing on and where they're headed. And when people set a New Year's resolution, the average person, what they'll say is, I got busy, then I got away from it, or I didn't see results right away, and so I lost my motivation.
they're focusing on what they don't have or what's not working. They are not focusing on how do I stay motivated today.
Right.
And that's what you're pointing out, right? That motivation is something that you work on daily and you train yourself, you know, so you're flipping that switch in your brain, that motivation switch, right? And by doing these activities and surrounding yourself with other people, because a lot of times I think that people just are not surrounding themselves in the right environment or with the right people or with the right resources to keep themselves motivated.
Right.
So
that definitely plays a part.
Yeah,
I'll give you a
absolutely.
perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Exercise. If you decided today that you're going to get on a physical fitness program and you went to the gym and you worked out for 1 hour, are you going to get any long-term benefit from that? Probably not. But if you worked out for an hour 3 times a week for 6 months, would you get benefit? Yeah. And the longer you did it, the more benefit you would get from it. Let's say you get on a physical fitness program for 2 years. You're following it faithfully for 2 years, look good, feel good, getting all the benefits from it, and for some silly reason, you simply stop. What happens to all of that accrued benefit in very short order? You go right back to where you were before. And I believe this kind of programming yourself mentally is very, very similar. If you write your goals down once a year, I'm all excited, because that's what these kickoff meetings are. It's a big waste of money. Yeah, we're going to break all the barriers this year. That's all that is. It's just one big giant Las Vegas opulent convention. It's fun. It's exciting. They fly out of there, you know, on a cloud. Go back to them a week later and it's all gone. And I say that from the stage. I say, you know, I sound like I'm shooting myself in the foot, but be honest. You know, they've wined you, they've dined you. Here you are in Vegas. They're bringing in top-notch speakers. You know, you're interacting with all the high achievers. You're going to come out of here flying. How long is that really going to last? Be honest. If you're not doing something to reinforce that. And the second thing that you brought up indirectly is, you know, by writing it down is an example of using your brain the way it was built to work. Your brain is a tracking mechanism. It goes back to when humans had to hunt for food. I'll show you as an example. I'm not faking this. You can tell anybody. If I ask, well, I'll ask you to do it. You're on video.
Sure.
Imagine there's a large circle in front of you. And starting at the top, don't move your head. Try to trace a large, smooth circle with your eye movements and see what happens. Just start at the top and trace a smooth circle. Now, the people watching this video, and you can go back and watch the video yourself, will find that your eyes are moving from point to point to point. They're moving in what are called saccades, because the unguided eye can't do it, cannot trace a smooth circle. You also cannot trace smooth lines. Imagine there's an imaginary line from left to right. Slowly trace a smooth, without moving your head, from one end of the room to the other. Smoothly, no, don't move your head, but do it smoothly if you can. Just your eyes are moving. Yep, point to point to point to point. Those are called saccadic motions. The unguided eye cannot trace a smooth line because it needs something to follow, because it's a tracking mechanism. This is how your brain is built. This is how you are biologically. Now, I don't know, can you see my finger?
Yes.
On the video? All right,
yes.
Follow my finger with your eye. I'll do it as wide as I can. Keep your eyes so people can actually see your eye movements. And if you open your eyes just a little bit wide so they can see, I'll do a straight line. Follow my finger with your eyes, and you'll get perfect straight lines. You're having trouble seeing them. Do it with your own finger. Put your finger in front of you, trace a smooth line. Now your eye, don't move your head, but your eye will move smoothly. No more choppiness. The saccades are gone, because now your brain has something to follow. It's biological. It's the way you're built. That's why having an external focus, like writing it down on a piece of paper, hearing it on a sound file, visualizing it, having something to focus on, is going to get a much higher degree of response.
Yes. Yes. I love learning new things. And that
this is going out to hypnotists, right?
Yeah. Well, this is going out to everybody, right? And so this is, you know, anybody that's looking to get ahead, what you're doing is you're backing up, you know, with neuroscience, why we do these things, why you write your goals down, why you have to surround yourself with other people who can help and support and lead you. Because if you don't have mentors or coaches in your life, you don't have someone that you're tracking, and it's a bumpy road, right? And it can be a lot smoother when you have someone that can lead you and help you go where you want to go. Right?
Something to follow. That's why I made it. Give the brain something to focus on. Do I have 5 minutes more?
Please, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to reveal something that I'd never, okay, I had an insight about a month ago, maybe even a little bit longer. I'm diving into all this research because of the nature of hypnosis, and I'm following what's going on, where research is heading. And there is a study that was done 2 years ago that is really quite famous. It was built upon other studies, but here is the gist of the study. They would put people in MRIs, and they would take a control group, people that were not hypnotized. They would show them a piece of cardboard that had rectangles filled with color. I forget what the scheme was, but let's say red, green, blue, yellow, or whatever. And while the subject was in the MRI, while the control group, they would ask them, look at the red, look at the green, look at the blue. Now, the retina is firing, and they would see what parts of the brain would light up, and they would map those parts. So that's what a person who is not hypnotized does, what parts of the brain are involved when they look at those colors. Then they removed the color. They had a piece of cardboard with just the outlines of the rectangles. And they took a second control group, not hypnotized, in an MRI. I want you to imagine as vividly as you can that this one's bright red, this one's bright blue, bright green, mapped out which parts of the brain would be activated. They are trying to imagine color. They can't see it. Same exact. Then they took the third group, the top 5%, highly hypnotizables in hypnosis. Open your eyes. This is red. Can you see it? Yes. Describe. This one's green. This one's blue. Analyze the results. And they found that the areas of the brain of the first group, the people that actually saw the color, virtually identical to the hypnotized group who were vividly imagining the color while in hypnosis, very different from the group that were not hypnotized, trying to imagine it, indicating that people who are hypnotized are not faking it. These are the results, that these people are immersed. They are actually seeing color. It's not like, okay, I'll please the hypnotist. I can see it, but they're not really seeing it. These people are really seeing it, which I joke, you could have asked any practicing hypnotist, we could have told you that. Mm-hmm. They're really seeing it, 6-inch man on their shoulder. Really see that 6-inch man, yeah? Yes. It's crazy, but yeah. So, but this is now empirical proof. They are now demonstrating this with MRIs. And I'm reading this study, I read this study, and it was a day or two later, and it hit me like a thunderclap. I'm going to reveal it here for a reason. I just showed you that humans can't, if you ask them to trace a straight line or do a circle in an imaginary sense, you'll get saccadic motion. They can't trace a smooth circle because the brain's a tracking mechanism, but give it something to follow, right? And you get it perfectly smooth. Mm-hmm. So what if you had a highly hypnotized subject, a somnambulist, and you told that person, when you open your eyes, you're going to see a finger moving around in a circle, and I want you to follow that finger with your eyes. Would their eyes move in saccades, or would they move in a perfect circle? If you say, I see a finger moving slowly back and forth across your face, follow it. Would a hypnotized person move in saccades because the finger's not there, or would it move in smooth lines? And if it moves in smooth lines, mm-hmm. we just broke a barrier, because that would be, we've never demonstrated anything like that before. I don't care who you get, you can't imitate that. You can and in fact, if that's the case, and my problem is I'm out of the loop. I'm not in hypnotherapy anymore, and I'm not doing much public speaking anymore. So I don't have a whole herd of highly hypnotizable subjects that I can do this on, but I've got an audience of hypnotists, right? So try it. If it works, it's probably only going to work with the very good subjects. And you have to give identical suggestions. In other words, if you had a control group, you have to say, open your eyes and imagine someone's moving their fingers slowly back and forth who's not hypnotized, and video their eye movements. You can even do this with the same, then in hypnosis, open your eyes, you'll see the finger moving back and forth. And if they now become smooth, that would indicate they're actually hallucinating the darn finger. They're following something that's not there. You can't fake that. You can't be trained on how to fake that. That's real stuff. That's a real, look, hypnotized, not hypnotized. And I've been trying to figure for a month how I can find some subjects to do this with. If your guys do it, tell them to video it on a smartphone, send it to me, write a paper. And that would be revolutionary.
Oh, that's exciting.
That would be a step that no one has ever taken before. Actual real life. Take a look. This is before, this is after, and you can't fake it. This is real.
Oh, well, I'm going to go do this now. I have to find out.
Makes sense?
So yeah, I got to
record it for me on the cell phone. If you
will.
Can imagine the finger, and this is just from watching you on video, they'll probably get more recordable by back and forth as opposed to a circle. Some people with you just can't see it as clearly, but if I have no idea what's going to happen. It's never
that's so interesting. There's a technique, EMDR, right, where eye movement sensitization and reprocessing, desensitization, right? They use it to help people overcome trauma, where you're moving the eyeballs and then changing the eye patterns for anybody that wouldn't know or never heard of that. And a lot of times you're kind of doing a neutral where you're just getting people relaxed, wiping the chalkboard away. And I would see people, their eyes, and they would do that saccadic rhythm, right, and be a little choppy. And I thought that they would be thinking about things instead of a smooth line, without ever realizing that it was just because of, how your brain tracks, and doing it on their own versus following my finger. It's just so fascinating, these observations that you've made. I'm so excited to go play with this. I've always got somebody
the observation about the movements, credit where credit is due. I read that years ago. And a book, Use Both Sides of Your Brain. I read that in the 70s.
Yeah. Fabulous stuff.
But putting that together, that was an insight, because that would be revolutionary. If you are actually showing in real life that, here is out of hypnosis, here is in hypnosis, can't be faked. It's not acting. I don't care. You can be the best actor. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And the foundation for that was the study with the color. They're showing the MRI, and if they're correct, that these people are actually seeing red and green, having the real experience. They're not just pretending. That was the conclusion of the study, and that's where they're heading experimentally. That would blow the doors off. I mean, that would just open the whole field. That would indeed be revolutionary. That's never been demonstrated before.
Yeah, so that goes back to, the theories of what hypnosis is, right? And so there was the camp that believed that there was a actual state of hypnosis where you're firing off different parts of your brain, you're activating different systems, maybe the, hypothalamus or the right or the left side of the brain. And then the other theorists that believed that there wasn't an actual state, it was just the power of suggestion and the rapport that you had with the person you were working with. And so what you're talking about, I believe it was Hilgard who was talking about, no, there's an actual state, that people go into, and you're firing off different parts of the brain. Now, when you talk about being in a trance versus not being in a trance, that might sound mystical, right, or woo-woo. But what we're actually talking about is firing off different portions or regions of the brain, which creates a new or a specific response. And so that makes it feel more academic or more scientific, which might help people to believe in it more, as opposed to someone's just faking it. But I remember someone saying one time, if it produces the desired results, who cares if you're faking it or not, right? Something's happening. If you walk in 1 minute, you're doing something, or you can't do something. 1 minute you can't fall asleep, or 1 minute you can't stop eating, and then the next minute you can fall asleep, or you can stop eating something and show that self-control. How you get there, many people would be like, who cares how I get there? The fact is that I did. But people like you and I, we want to know how you got there so that we can replicate it intentionally. Exactly.
And the video I did at Heartland, I made a strict qualification. I'm going to use a word that I know is controversial, and scientists will not use the word. I'm going to use the word trance, and I'm going to use it to encompass a broad range of behaviors. I think when you have highway hypnosis, when you look up the sky for the answer, when you're so absorbed in TV you can't hear someone talking to you, I'm going to use that as a trance. Neurologists now talk in terms of networks. When they do their studies, they now, most cognitive tasks involve many areas of the brain being involved. So they now have networks. You have the salience network, the executive control network, and the default network, which I personally think is all BS. But when they see the different areas of the brain, and this is what they compare experimentally, this is how they talk, that when the results of that study, they saw an increase in the default mode network and a decrease in the salience network and an increase in functional connectivity between the default mode and the salience network. That's how you talk, science talk. But they're saying exactly what we're saying.
That's exactly right. Right. So they're using all the medical jargon, so that, because that's the language that they're speaking, but we're saying the same thing. Right.
Animal
And so,
magnetism, hypnotism, conscious, unconscious, trance. It's just a function of the environment that you are in. And you want the real kicker? Do you know what the default mode network is?
Drop it on me, brother Anthony. Preach on.
Okay, so when they finally got PET scans and MRIs, and they would give people cognitive tasks, and they started saying consistently, these are areas of the brain, like the hypothalamus and the signaling gyrate and all that jazz, are being affected. So this is a network that happens when you're making decisions. They call it the executive control network. The salience network. You've got a lot of stimuli coming into your body. Do I pay attention to your voice? Do I pay attention to the itch on my foot? Do I pay attention to the dog barking in the background? That's the salience network. And then they laid them in MRIs, and they said, all right, clear your mind. We're going to do the next test. Just relax, let your mind go. Just relax, go anywhere. Boom. Stuff started lighting up. Totally shocked them. They thought they would see a decrease in electronic activity. And it turns out, clearing your mind, relaxing, entering a Zen state, you actually see an increase. Wow. And they didn't know what to make of it. It shocked them. And so that's the default mode network. It doesn't make sense that if you're lying there not thinking of anything and not really worrying and just letting your mind go, that you would see less neural activity. They saw more neural activity. Now, what happens in mutual inhibition when these things are and now go to default mode, bling, it's not turning something off. They expected when they said, relax, let your mind clear, stop thinking about anything, that they were turning something off. I believe they were very much turning something on.
Oh, that's
And they call
powerful.
it the default mode network. Instead of they're laying there relaxed. and it shocked the hell out of us when we saw it all light up.
Yeah.
Google default mode network. It's really kind of cool. It just was completely unexpected results. But if it is neural inhibition, that actually supports the concept of mutual inhibition.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
But that's their language, just so you know.
Sure. I mean, that's really exciting, though, the idea that you're not trying to turn your brain off. You're really trying to turn your brain on, right? Or the right parts of your brain that are going to lead you to feeling the more desirable emotions, that we're all seeking. I mean, that's really powerful stuff. I love that.
They're starting to unwind it. And hopefully within my lifetime, they'll come up with the definitive answer. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. So I just want to follow back up on one thing that you talked about, and then we'll close this up because I know we've gone way over on your time. I want to be respectful of that, but this has been so good. I've just loved every minute of it. So one of the things for everybody listening right now, I want you to go back, like halfway through this podcast episode and listen to how Anthony described being on stage. When I talked about how do you really captivate people, and I talk a lot about insecurity and fear and how our lack of confidence holds us back. And when I asked Anthony his secrets about how to be entertaining, I want you to really go back and listen to that part because I took note of it, and he said everything that he validated the things that I was talking about. When he gets on stage, he's not making it about himself or his performance. He's being honest, he's having fun, and he's making it about the audience. He's not trying to be the fancy guy up there that's, on the stage making all the money. He is really connecting with the audience and just having a good time and teaching and sharing what he knows and sharing his truth and doing it in a way that is empowering. He's not out there trying to prove himself. I mean, he's already on the stage. He's already proved it. He's there being authentic and making it about the audience and just focusing on giving. And when you do that, everything else falls into place because people like you and they trust you and they want to go along with you. And then when he creates that space, that psychological safety in the audience, it allows people to be able to do the craziest, wildest things on stage, for the laughter, because they know that Anthony's going to take care of them. That, so he's created the trust. And in a world where people aren't trusting each other, these are great examples of how you build trust. When you've got the top performers who are winning awards and they want to look successful, they protect their image, they built a reputation, and they're about to go and act all goofy and do all these funny routines. They would only do that if they knew that Anthony was going to make them look good afterwards and make them shine even more rather than try to embarrass them. And so there's so many lessons in here. I know we've talked about hypnosis and neuroscience in the brain, but when you go back and you listen to these powerful nuggets about how to create trust and how to just be yourself and how to be authentic and make it about others, and really powerful lessons. So Anthony, I want to thank you so much for this conversation, for all the things. I made so many notes on my Post-it note. There's more ink than there is yellow. And I should have got a bigger piece of paper. So I really love it. And so make sure that you go and you check out Anthony Galie's stuff. You can see his videos on YouTube. You can just do a search on him. I'll put some links on the podcast as well on our page so that you can go and check him out and follow what he's doing and be a part of his world, because obviously this guy knows what he's doing and he is a top achiever. So
Thank
Anthony,
you.
Again, happy birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you so much for being with us.
If any of the listeners of this podcast run that experiment with the eyes and get a result, I'd like to hear about it. I have an 800 number, 800-462-5748. Call me, let me know, send me the link. I would like to see it. Only reason I'm publicly announcing this is I'm having difficulty finding a ton of very good subjects under the circumstances. And I know that they may have one or two, but if there's enough of them out there, I have no idea what the result of the experiment will be. But if it turns out the way I'm guessing it will turn out, that's truly revolutionary. That is that moves the ball significantly. So I would love to hear about that. If any of you see it and can video it, please send it to me, because I would love to see it.
Yeah, I'm going to make that happen. So
1-800-462-5748. It's 1-800-GOALS, number 4, letter U, goals for you.
Oh, nice. Very good. Yeah, I'll make sure and put that in the podcast notes as well. So outstanding. Anthony Galie, everybody.
Nice to meet you.
Mesmerizing. Yeah,
hey, I debated about talking about this experiment. I hope it works out. I would love to see some film, and if it doesn't, I'd like to know that too. So,
well, that's the researcher in you. That's the scientist in you, right? So you have a hypothesis and you want to test it out, and you're open to see, if it works or not. Either way, it's feedback, and then whatever feedback we get, then we make some corrections, and then make another hypothesis, and then go for it again, because that's what achievers do. Right. So
outstanding meeting you, and thank you for the questions. Questions were excellent, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Anthony, and everybody that's been listening. Thank you again. With I always say that, if you weren't with us, then Anthony and I would have had a wonderful, amazing conversation. But the fact that you are with us, the fact that you are with us is what makes this whole thing mesmerizing. So thanks so much. Make sure that you put what you've learned into action, and then go out there and make today a sure success. You'll never get this day back, so make it count, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, would you like more free tips on how to be a mesmerizing leader? Then check out mesmerizingleadership.com, and also hang out with me on Facebook, facebook.com/Tim Shurr. Thanks so much, and make your